Hey everyone, and welcome back to AI Paper Podcasts, where we take a deep dive into the coolest AI research papers. Today we're tackling a paper that's all about, it's kind of like peering into the brains of AI models.
Oh yeah, that's a good way to put it. See if we can figure out how they think. And maybe even find like a shared language between them.
Exactly. It's like we're trying to decode the secret language of AI.
Exactly.
So the paper we're looking at today is called Universal Sparse Autoencoders, Interpretable Cross-Model Concept Alignment.
Catchy title, right?
Definitely rolls right off the tongue.
But seriously, it's by Harish the Sarathan and his team. And they've done some really impressive work here.
Yeah, and for our listeners who aren't, knee-deep in AI research every day, can you give us the quick rundown? Like, what's so special about this paper?
Sure. So typically when we analyze AI models, we tend to focus on just one model at a time.
Yeah.
Like we try to understand how a specific ResNet model classifies images.
Right, makes sense.
But what this paper does is build a bridge between different models. Like, it lets us compare and contrast how a ResNet thinks compared to, say, a vision transformer.
Oh, wow. Okay, I see where this is going. So instead of just analyzing one model in isolation, this gives us a way to see the bigger picture.
Exactly. It's like having a Rosetta Stone for AI. It helps us understand how different models represent the world using a shared set of concepts.
Okay, I'm officially intrigued. Let's break this down a bit further. First off, what exactly is a Universal Sparse Autoencoder, or USAE?
So a USAE is essentially a special type of neural network. It's trained on the internal activations of multiple models.
Okay, and just to remind everyone, activations are like the internal representations of data that a model learns, right?
You got it. So the USAE takes these activations from different models and learns to encode them into a shared concept space.
Concept space, huh? Sounds kind of abstract.
It is a bit abstract, but think of it as like a high-dimensional map, where each point on the map represents a specific concept, and the USAE learns how to map the activations from different models onto this map.
So it's like finding the common ground between different models' understanding of the world.
Exactly. It's like taking the internal state of a convolutional neural network, like ResNet, and mapping it into the same space as the internal state of, say, a vision transformer.
Whoa, okay, that's pretty wild. And the paper claims these concepts are universal, meaning they're shared across different models. How do they even test that?
Yeah, so to figure out if a concept is truly universal, they use a few tricks. One is something called firing entropy.
Firing entropy sounds intense.
It's not as scary as it sounds. It basically measures how consistently a concept is activated across different models. So if a concept has high firing entropy, it means it's consistently activated across a bunch of different models, regardless of their architecture or training data.
Oh, I get it. So it's like saying, hey, all these models agree this is an important concept for understanding the world.
Exactly. They also looked at co-firing, which measures how often different concepts are activated together for the same input.
So like if concept A is activated, is concept B usually activated too?
You got it. And what they found is that the most important concepts, the ones that are heavily used by the models for making predictions, are also the most universal ones.
So there's a link between a concept's importance and its universality. That's interesting.
It is, and it kind of suggests that there might be like a fundamental set of concepts that any AI model needs to learn to really understand the world.
Okay, so this USAE is learning these shared concepts, but what kind of concepts are we talking about here? Like, are we talking simple stuff like cat and dog, or is it more complex than that?
It's way more complex than that. We're talking about concepts that range from low-level features like colors and textures.
Okay, sure, makes sense.
All the way up to higher-level concepts like object parts. And get this, even abstract ideas.
Hold on, abstract ideas in AI models.
Yeah.
That's blowing my mind a little bit. Can you give me an example?
Yeah, sure. So one example they found was a concept for mouth-open animal jaws. It's not just identifying a specific object like a dog or a lion. It's a characteristic that spans across species.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's pretty abstract. So it's like the USAE is picking up on these underlying patterns that connect different things in the world.
Exactly. And another really cool example is they found a concept for faces of animals in a group. And they found this concept in vision transformer models, which don't explicitly focus on object structures.
So even though VITs process images differently than, say, convolutional neural networks, they're still learning these higher-level abstract concepts. That's really cool.
It is. It adds to the idea that there's this deeper shared understanding that's emerging across different AI architectures.
I am hooked. Okay, let's say we've got this USAE learning these cool shared concepts. how do we actually see these concepts? Like, how do we know what the model is thinking?
That's where this super cool technique comes in called coordinated activation maximization.
Okay, break that down for me. What is coordinated activation maximization?
So traditional activation maximization lets you visualize what a single model is thinking by finding an input that maximally activates a specific neuron or concept.
Right. I've seen some of those trippy images that come out of activation maximization.
Exactly, but coordinated activation maximization takes it to a whole new level. It lets you do this across multiple models at the same time.
Wait, so we can see how different models represent the same concept? That's awesome.
It is! You can literally feed the same concept to a ResNet, a VT, and whatever other model you want, and see how their visualizations differ. It gives you amazing insights into how each model thinks.
Okay, I'm already thinking about all the possibilities this opens up. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's talk about the results. They trained this USAE on 3 pretty popular vision models, Dino V2, SIGLIP, and VIT. So what happened when they put this Rosetta Stone to the test?
Well, the first thing they wanted to know is how well could this USAE actually reconstruct the original activations from each model? You see, for this universal concept space to work, it needs to be able to accurately rebuild the unique features of any model, using only those shared concepts.
All right, so if the USAE is really capturing the essence of each model's understanding, it should be able to reconstruct their activations pretty darn well.
Exactly. And they used a metric called the R2 score, which tells us how much of the variance in the original activations is explained by the reconstructed ones. Higher the R2 score, the better the reconstruction. And guess what? They got some pretty impressive results, even when they're reconstructing activations from a completely different model than the one they used for encoding.
So even if they fed the USAE activations from Dino V2, but then asked it to reconstruct activations from VIT, it still did a good job.
Exactly. That's the beauty of this universal concept space. It's like a common language that all these models can understand.
Okay, that's super cool. So this cross-model reconstruction performance really shows that the USAE is capturing these essential shared features across models. What else did they find?
Well, they also did a bunch of qualitative analysis. Because remember, each of these models has a different architecture, right? And they're trained differently, and those differences really showed up in the types of concepts they learned.
Ooh, okay, spill the tea. What kind of unique concepts did they find in each model?
All right, so for example, Dino V2, which is trained with self-distillation across different views and image crops, seems to be really good at encoding geometric features and depth cues.
So, like it's paying attention to things like perspective lines and the relative positions of objects in 3D space.
You got it. They found concepts in Dino V2 that specifically fired for things like converging lines, object groupings at different depths, and even features that suggest some level of view invariance, like the model recognizes an object even if it's seen from a different angle.
Makes sense given how it's trained. It's like Dino V2 is the geometry whiz of the group.
Yeah.
What about SIGLIP? That one's a vision language model, right? Anything interesting going on there?
SIGLIP was super interesting because it really blurred the lines between visual and textual elements in its concepts. Remember, it's trained to align image and text representations, so it's learning to associate words with images.
Right, which makes sense given that it's a vision language model. But how did that show up in the USAE's analysis?
Well, they found a concept that fired both for images of stars and for the actual word star. So it's like the model is learning a concept that encompasses both the visual representation of a star and its textual label.
Whoa, that's wild. It's like it's learning a concept that's both visual and semantic at the same time.
Exactly. And they also found a concept for musical instruments that also fired for images of musical notes, again, blending the visual and the textual.
That's really incredible. So even though the USAE wasn't trained on any text data directly, it was still able to uncover these textually infused concepts within SIGLIP's activations. What about VIT? Any surprises there?
VIT was interesting because it actually showed the strongest overlap between the concepts discovered by the USAE and the concepts that VIT learned on its own when trained with a separate sparse autoencoder.
So the USAE's interpretation of VIT's concepts aligned really well with what you would see if you just analyze VIT in isolation.
Precisely. It suggests that VIT's concept representation might be more fundamental and universal compared to the other models.
Which kind of makes sense when you think about how VITs process images, right? They break them down into these little patches and are known for being really good at capturing global relationships within images.
Exactly. So the fact that VIT's concepts are more consistent between the USAE and its own individual sparse autoencoder might mean that VIT is learning a more general set of concepts that aren't as tied to specific object structures or visual features.
This is also fascinating. It's like we're getting a peek into the brains of these different models and seeing how they each interpret the world in their own unique way.
It really is. And to really visualize these concepts, the authors actually used coordinated activation maximization.
Oh yeah. Let's see what these concepts actually look like. What do they find?
Well, they were able to visualize a whole range of concepts, from simple features like curves and textures to more complex things like object groupings and even facial features.
Can you give me a specific example? Like, what did the curve concept look like for the different models?
Yeah, so when they visualized the curve concept, they found an interesting difference between Dino V2 and the other models. Dino V2 tended to activate more strongly for larger, more sweeping curves, while SIGLIP and VIT were more sensitive to smaller, finer curves.
So Dino V2 is thinking big picture curves, while SIGLIP and VIT are more detail-oriented.
Exactly. And again, that aligns perfectly with what we know about their architectures and training methods.
This is truly groundbreaking stuff. It feels like we're on the verge of understanding how these AI models think at a much deeper level.
I agree. It's a huge step forward in AI interpretability.
Okay, but let's take a step back for a second and think about why this is all so important. Why should we even care about understanding the concepts that these AI models are learning?
That's a great question, and I think there are a few really important reasons why this research matters. First off, as AI systems are getting more and more complex, and we're using them in more and more aspects of our lives, it's becoming absolutely essential that we understand how they're making decisions.
All right, we can't just have these black box models making choices that impact people's lives without knowing why they're making those choices.
Exactly. We need to be able to open up the black box and see what's going on inside, and that's where USAEs come in. They give us a tool to peer into those black boxes and start to understand how different models represent the world.
Okay, so that's one reason why this is important. But are there other implications of this research beyond just understanding how models work?
Oh, absolutely. I think this work has the potential to revolutionize how we approach AI development in so many ways. So, for example, one really important application is in the area of bias detection.
Okay, yeah, that's a big one. We want to make sure that AI systems aren't perpetuating harmful stereotypes or discriminating against certain groups of people.
Exactly. And USAEs could be a really powerful tool for auditing AI models for fairness, because we can compare how different models represent the same concept and see if there are any systematic differences in how they treat different groups.
So like if a model consistently activates certain concepts more strongly for images of men than for images of women, that could be a sign of bias.
Exactly, and that's something that we need to be able to detect and address. So bias detection is one really important application. But there are other exciting possibilities too.
What's up?
Well, imagine being able to transfer knowledge between different AI models. If we can understand the core concepts that really powerful models are relying on, we might be able to transfer that knowledge to other models that haven't learned those concepts yet.
Oh, wow. So like instead of starting from scratch every time we train a new model, we could give it a head start by incorporating knowledge from existing models.
Precisely. And that could dramatically reduce the amount of time and data it takes to train new models, which would make AI development much more efficient and accessible.
That would be a game changer. And it could also lead to the creation of more robust and generalizable AI systems.
Right. By combining the strengths of different models, we might be able to overcome their individual limitations and build AI that's more adaptable and reliable in real-world situations.
This is getting me really excited about the future of AI. It feels like we're moving towards a more collaborative and knowledge-driven approach to AI development.
I think so too. And this is just the beginning. There's so much more to explore with USAEs and other techniques for understanding and interpreting AI.
Before we get too carried away, though, are there any limitations or challenges that we should be aware of with this approach?
Of course. Like any new technology, USAEs have their limitations. One challenge is that the performance of USAEs can be sensitive to the choice of hyperparameters, especially when you're training them on a larger number of models.
Hyperparameters, so like things like the learning rate, the sparsity constraint, the size of the concept dictionary, all that good stuff.
Yeah, exactly. It's important to carefully tune those parameters to get the best results, and that can be a bit tricky.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Any other limitations we should be aware of?
Another limitation is that this particular paper focused on discovering concepts at the very last layer of each vision model.
Okay, so they're not really looking at how concepts evolve and change across the different layers of a model.
Right. So while analyzing the last layer is a good starting point, it would be really interesting to extend this framework to see how concepts kind of emerge and are transformed as information flows through a model.
Yeah, that would give us a much richer understanding of how these models are actually processing information.
Absolutely. And then finally, while a lot of the concepts discovered by USAEs are interpretable and make sense to humans, there were definitely some concepts that were a bit harder to interpret.
So there's still some mystery in those black boxes.
There always is. But I think that just makes it all the more exciting to keep exploring and try to understand what's going on in those AI brains.
I totally agree. So we've talked about applications like bias detection and knowledge transfer. But there's one more really fascinating aspect of this paper that I wanted to touch on. Concept consistency. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure. So with concept consistency, the authors wanted to see how closely the concepts discovered by the USAE matched up with the concepts that each model learned on its own.
So it's like comparing the USAE's universal understanding of a concept to each model's own individual interpretation of that concept.
Exactly. And to measure the overlap between the concept dictionaries, they used cosine similarity, which basically tells you how similar two vectors are.
So a higher cosine similarity means there's more overlap between the concepts.
You got it. And what they found is that there's actually a lot of variation in concept consistency across the three models they tested.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Which model had the highest concept consistency?
Well, VIT, the model that processes images in a patchwise manner, showed the highest concept consistency.
So VIT's understanding of the world aligns most closely with the USAE's universal concepts. That's pretty interesting.
It is, and it could be because VIT's architecture kind of encourages it to learn these more fundamental visual concepts that aren't as tied to specific object structures.
That makes sense. What about Dino V2 and SIGLIP? How did they fare?
They showed lower concept consistency, which suggests that their concepts are more specialized and potentially less aligned with those universal concepts that the USAE is picking up on.
So their individual interpretations of the world are more unique and influenced by their specific architectures and training methods.
Exactly. Dino V2 with its focus on geometric features and depth cues, and SIGLIP with its integration of text and visual information. They seem to be learning concepts that are more tailored to their specific domains.
This whole concept consistency analysis adds a whole new layer to our understanding of how these different models are learning and representing knowledge. It really highlights the fact that there isn't one right way for an AI to understand the world.
Absolutely. It's more like a spectrum, with some models leaning towards more universal concepts while others develop more specialized interpretations.
And the USAE gives us this amazing framework for comparing those different perspectives and gaining a deeper understanding of what's driving AI learning.
It really is a powerful tool, and it has the potential to unlock so many new insights into the workings of AI and pave the way for a future where these systems are more transparent, reliable, and ultimately beneficial to society.
This has been such an insightful conversation. I feel like we've only just scratched the surface. But I'm already so excited about the future of USAEs and the whole field of AI interpretability.
I agree. It's an incredibly exciting time to be working in this field, and I think we're on the cusp of some truly transformative breakthroughs.
Well said. This deep dive into USAEs has been truly illuminating. It's given us a glimpse into the future of AI interpretability and the potential for a more collaborative and knowledge-driven approach to AI development.
I'm glad you found it insightful. It's so important that we continue to explore these ideas and push the boundaries of what's possible with AI. By understanding how these models work, we can make sure that they're used responsibly and ethically for the benefit of all of humanity.
Couldn't agree more. This paper has laid a really strong foundation for future research in this area, and I'm confident that we're going to see even more groundbreaking advancements in the coming years.
I share your optimism. This work on USAEs is just the beginning of a much larger journey to unlock the full potential of AI, and I can't wait to see where it takes us.
Before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I wanted to bring up one more idea that's been kind of swirling around in my head throughout this discussion.
Oh, I'm all ears. What you're thinking?
Well, it's this. We've talked about how USAEs can help us analyze models, detect biases, and even transfer knowledge between models. But what about the even bigger picture? What if this research is pointing us towards something truly fundamental about intelligence itself?
Whoa. Okay, yeah, I see where you're going with this. It's a really interesting thought. What if, these universal concepts that are emerging across all these different AI models are actually hinting at some underlying structure of intelligence, in general, not just, artificial intelligence?
Right. Exactly. It's like we're discovering a common language of thought, a set of building blocks that any intelligent system needs to make sense of the world.
And if that's true, I mean, wow, that has some pretty profound implications, right, for how we understand, like, both AI and our own minds.
It's a bit mind-blowing when you think about it that way.
Hmm.
Like, could it be that these universal concepts that the USAE is uncovering are actually holding the key to unlocking the secrets of human consciousness?
It's a wild thought. It's almost like we're reverse engineering intelligence by studying these AI models.
Right. And the more we learn about how AI systems represent knowledge and reason, the more we might uncover about our own cognitive processes.
It's like holding a mirror up to ourselves, but the reflection is coming from an artificial intelligence.
Exactly. A reflection that could really challenge our assumptions about how we think and learn. Like, it could even lead to new breakthroughs in fields like psychology and neuroscience.
That would be amazing. It's like this research isn't just about understanding AI anymore. It's about understanding ourselves.
I totally agree. And the implications for the future of AI development are pretty huge too, right? Like, if we can really identify and leverage these universal concepts, it could revolutionize how we design and train AI systems.
Absolutely. We could potentially build AI that's way more intuitive, more adaptable, and really importantly, more aligned with human values. AI that can reason about the world in a way that's closer to how we do.
And that opens up some really exciting possibilities for collaboration between humans and AI, right?
Yeah.
Like, we could actually work alongside AI systems that understand our intentions and contribute to problem solving in a way that feels natural and intuitive.
Exactly. It's a future where AI isn't just a replacement for human intelligence, but an augmentation of it. A future where humans and AI work together to solve the world's biggest challenges.
That's a future I can definitely get behind. And it seems like research like this on USAEs is a really crucial step in that direction. It's pushing the boundaries of AI interpretability and giving us a glimpse of what might be possible.
I couldn't agree more. We're living in a truly amazing time for AI research. And I have no doubt that we'll continue to see incredible breakthroughs in the years to come.
Well, that brings us to the end of part 2 of our deep dive into Universal Sparse Autoencoders. It's been a fascinating journey so far, and I want to thank you again for sharing your expertise with us.
My pleasure. It's been a great conversation.
If you've been enjoying this episode, make sure to subscribe to AI Paper Podcasts for more deep dives into the latest and greatest in AI research.
And don't forget to check out the show notes for links to the paper we discussed today and other resources.
Okay, so before we jump into the final part of our discussion, I want to touch on one more thing that I found really interesting in the paper.
Oh, what's that?
So they talk about how different models have different levels of concept consistency with the USAE. Like how much the concepts the USAE finds actually match up with what the individual models are doing.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it kind of makes sense when you think about it, right? Like different models are going to have their own quirks, their own biases based on how they were trained and what architecture they're using.
Right, like we were talking earlier about how Dino V2 seems to be all about the geometry. So I guess it wouldn't be surprising if its concepts ended up being a bit different from, say, VITs.
Exactly. So what they did was they compared the concept dictionaries learned by the USAE with those learned by separate sparse autoencoders trained on each individual model.
Separate sparse autoencoders. So like each model gets its own little mini USAE just for itself.
Yeah, you can think of it that way. And they used a measure called cosine similarity to see how much the dictionaries overlapped. Basically, how similar the concepts were between the USAE and the individual model's autoencoder.
What do they find? Spill the beans.
Well, it turns out that VIT, the one that processes images in those little patches, actually showed the highest concept consistency.
So VIT's view of the world is kind of the closest to the USAE's universal view.
Yeah, it is. And it kind of supports the idea that VIT might be learning these more fundamental visual concepts, you know? The ones that aren't so tied to specific objects or scenes.
Right. Like it's looking for the underlying patterns that make up any image, regardless of what's actually in it.
Exactly. But Deno V2 and SIGLIP, those guys had lower concept consistency. So their concepts were a bit more specialized, a bit more unique to them.
So again, like Dino V2 is probably still hung up on geometry, and SIGLIP is all about the text and image connections. Makes sense.
Yep. And this whole idea of concept consistency, it really adds another dimension to how we think about these models. Like, it's not just about whether they can do the task they're trained on, but also about how they're representing the world internally.
It's like we're starting to get a sense of their individual personalities almost.
So yeah, I like that. It's like each model has its own way of seeing things, its own biases and preferences.
This is all so cool. It feels like we're really starting to crack the code of AI,
It does, doesn't it? And honestly, I think this is just the tip of the iceberg. Like, there's so much more to explore, so many more questions to answer.
Well, I'm definitely excited to see where this research goes next. But for now, I think that about wraps up our deep dive into Universal Sparse Autoencoders.
Yeah, I think we covered a lot of ground today.
It's been an amazing conversation. Thanks again for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure to talk about this stuff.
And to all our listeners out there, thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to AI Paper Podcasts for more deep dives into the latest AI research. And don't forget to check out the show notes for links to the paper we discussed today and other cool resources. We'll see you next time.